Tonight we're on to part 4 of Your Money and You, a financial series. Part 4 is action. And action. What can we do? There's a lot of instruction, a lot of principles from God's Word, but what then? How do then we start to put things into practice? And that's what this section really deals with for the most part. So let's go to the Lord in prayer tonight. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity to be here and continue through this series, and pray that it would be beneficial, that we would cover what you want to have covered tonight, and that it would be clear and plain, and that we would have open hearts to your Word and principles from your Word. And if there's whatever way that things need to be put into practice, Lord, we pray that you would help us in that tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Action. And the primary focus tonight is dealing with the subject of debt. And now this verse is was one we covered last week, but let's turn to Proverbs chapter 22. Proverbs 22. We'll look at a few scriptures to start with tonight. Proverbs chapter 22. And verse 17, Proverbs 22 and verse 17. So we'll start with some principles of what the Bible says of dealing with debt and our attitude toward debt, and then we'll get into some more as we go along here. But Proverbs 22 and verse, that is not right. Proverbs 22 and verse 7, excuse me, that is not 17, it's verse 7. Put 17 there, but that's not correct. Proverbs 22 and verse 7 says, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." Then the principle of that is that the borrower serves the lender. And so we spent some time on that last week from Proverbs 22:7. And so that is an important thing to remember, is that we are first and foremost to serve the Lord. So when we have debts, we have things that need to be paid, then that puts us in service to someone else, service to a lender. And our economy is built upon debt. It's something that is just an accepted part of life. Often the focus becomes growth at any cost, and if that means more debt, then so be it. And there was a time when the United States had a very low debt load. I wish I would have maybe looked up some statistics of this, but I believe maybe from George W. Bush through our present day, I think has racked up more debt combined than, in the entire history of our country. And so there are things that have been set in motion that lends itself to that. But our country is really just under a heavy debt load, both from a governmental perspective. Massachusetts, as a state, has one of the highest debts per capita as far as the public debt is one of those in not as great of financial shape. And I think it was this is the budget that they are in the process of trying to pass. Even with all the budget, the financial shortcomings of coronavirus, they're still increasing spending, I think, by 5% or so. And just continually, they just can't help themselves. Politicians cannot help themselves, but we get the politicians that we elect into office, and I say we, as far as, not you and I necessarily, we'd probably pick some different ones. But as far as a society, as far as a state or a country, until the American people start to demand, you need to get this spending under control and get this debt under control, it's not going to. And there's also a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of different things in the background that there are just some reasons why why debt is so attractive to certain people. But then there are a lot of people who just don't operate based on biblical principles and recognizing that debt inherently, debt is just something to not like. Whether you have debt or not, whether you use debt or not in a certain way, it's still something that we recognize that the borrower serves the lender. And so we talked about that last week more. But turn to Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13. And verse 7, Romans 13 and verse 7 says, "Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor." And so this has to do with submission to governmental authority, and even their the tributes that are meant to be paid, the taxes that are meant to be paid. I am not one who is a proponent of not paying your taxes, of tax evasion. I'm not a proponent of that. I think that we should operate within the realm of how things are set up. And there was a church, actually while George W. Bush was president, there was a church in Indiana that decided we're not going to pay I think it was the payroll taxes or something regarding their church employees, and they ended up getting in some major trouble. And I just don't think that's a proper way to deal with things. Whether you disagree or agree with the system or the amount of taxes there are, we do live in, and by the way, by the time when Paul was writing this, they weren't living under the most righteous system either. And so it's important that we do the best we can to have a submissive spirit, both in regarding laws and in even the taxes, tribute, the things that are charged, even if we don't necessarily like it, or if we wish something could be different. Now, Albert Barnes says, let me go back here in verse 8, "Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." So kind of transitions in from specifically talking about tribute to whom tribute is due, or render therefore to all their dues. But then it says, takes a bigger picture here of owe no man anything but to love one another. And for he that loveth another fulfilled the law. So love is that debt that we always owe. That's just ongoing. There's never a time where we satisfy a debt of love. That's just should be a way of life. But our goal and the command here is owe no man anything. And so, we should not be people who have other bills to pay, other outstanding bills to pay that we need to make good. We should always be making good on the bills that we have and say, all right, I've got this bill. I'm going to make sure this bill is paid. And the only thing I should owe is to love others, love one another. Now, Albert Barnes says the interpretation of this command is to be taken with this limitation, that we are not to be indebted to him so as to injure him or to work ill to him. This rule, together with the other rules of Christianity, would propose a remedy for all the evils of bad debts in the following manner. It would teach people to be industrious, and this would commonly prevent the necessity of contracting debts. It would make them frugal, economical, and humble in their views and manner of life. It would teach them to bring up their families in habits of industry. Religion would produce sober, chastened views of the end of life, of the great design of living, and would take off the affections from the splendor, gaiety, and extravagances which lead often to the contraction of debts. And religion would put a period to the vices and unlawful desires which now prompt people to contract debts. And it would make them honest in paying them. It would make them conscientious, prompt, friends of truth, and disposed to keep their promises. When you have that perspective of owe no man anything, it means I'm going to keep whatever debts I have to a minimum, and I don't want to have outstanding payments to make to people. And also, it would also then help us in what our interests are, or what our lusts might be, or I should say, in his words, vices and unlawful desires, those things that maybe a lot of people use to feed the flesh. How many people make decisions to make themselves feel good that involves spending a bunch of money? And people go into debt to do that. Oh, just go into debt to take your next vacation. It doesn't really matter. Spend $2,000, $3,000 on your vacation. Just take out a loan for that, no problem. But maybe if you don't have the $2,000 or $3,000, maybe you should take a different kind of vacation, maybe for $500. If you have $500, not $2,000 or $3,000. And so, but the world that we live in is one that pushes people to want more and more and more, encourages people to want more and more and more. Why? Because people always want more and more money. Now, the principle here is getting out and staying out of debt should be a high priority. When the Bible says, owe no man anything, it means I'm going to pay my dues, pay my taxes. And so there's a broader meaning to that than just simply, it's not just talking about debt as far as loans and things. It's just simply you need to make good on your financial responsibilities. Turn to Psalm 37. Psalm 37. Psalm 37 and verse 21. Psalm 37 and verse 21. The wicked borroweth and payeth not again, but the righteous showeth mercy and giveth. And a simple principle is pay your bills. Pay your bills. Pay what you owe. Pay the things that are owed. Pay the things that you owe. The wicked borroweth and payeth not again. And one of the most annoying advertisements I've heard on the radio, satellite radio, is one of the credit card companies don't want you to know that you don't have to pay them back. So call this number and we'll help you in telling you how you can do things where you don't have to pay. Well, since when is it the credit card company's fault that you're the one who used it and charged up that debt? That's right. I mean, you made the purchase, now you got to pay the bill. And I know they do things to make it enticing to try to get you to use your card more, like rewards and maybe an introductory interest rate or all those things. But I mean, there are people who get over their heads but you got to pay your bills. Make sure bills are paid. Don't just simply. I mean, what a terrible Christian testimony it is for a Christian to just say, "I'm not paying my bills. I'm not paying my debt." Whether it's a credit card, whether it's a student loan, or whatever it is, it's a bad testimony to refuse to pay the legitimate bills that we have. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 4. Now this is talking about particularly a vow to God, but there's a principle here that is helpful for us. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 4, when thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than thou shouldest vow and not pay. So don't make promises you can't keep. Don't make a promise to pay something unless you know you can follow through. And that's where people get in trouble with debt because, well, you might be able to manage a bit of debt initially, maybe just a little bit to start with, but then I'm telling you, the debts become a habit. If you get in that pattern, they become a habit. Well, all right, I'm already in this debt, but I have this other thing I need to get, to pay, or to buy. And so, all right, well, debt comes easy. So I'll go into debt some more, and I'll go into debt some more. But it just piles up, and eventually people get so bad they can't pay it anymore. It's not where it starts, it's where it leads, it's where it ends. And we should not make promises to pay unless we can follow through. And particularly this is talking about a vow to God. We shouldn't make promises to God if we're not serious about keeping our word and doing what we said we would do. Proverbs chapter 22. Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22. And verse 26. Proverbs 22 and verse 26 says, be not thou one of them that strike hands, or of them that are sureties for debts. If thou hast nothing to pay, why should he take away thy bed from under thee? So don't put yourself on the hook for the debts of other people. Don't put yourself on the hook. Now I understand there might be some certain situations where going in with somebody on a loan might be a responsible thing to do, depending if there's a certain arrangement set up. But the Bible, Proverbs in different places, really speaks cautiously or negatively about getting on the hook for other people's debts. So it's something that needs to be really looked at, that you're not just helping, that you're not enabling someone's responsibility. Or if it's someone who might be, maybe they haven't necessarily shown themselves to be irresponsible, but maybe they're just getting started out, sometimes they just need to work their way to being able to get that loan for themselves, if they need a loan for something, which we'll talk about the different types of debt here in a little bit. But if they're going to get a loan, well, if they can't get the loan, that means there's a reason why they can't get the loan. It could be credit, or it could be the debts they already owe, or it could be maybe they don't make enough income to pay. And so there are different reasons why that we shouldn't put ourselves on the hook for the debts of other people. And it says here in verse 27, if thou hast nothing to pay, why should he take away thy bed from under thee? Why should you lose what you have for the sake of the other person when they don't pay what they owe? And some people fall on hard times and should be helped, and it's proper to help people that are falling on hard times. We should not enable irresponsibility. Something I heard another preacher say in a financial message, he said, husbands should not leave debt to their wives because the bride of Christ has no debt to pay. Think about it that way. Husbands, you should not leave debt to your wives. If it means taking out an extra life insurance, if you have debts, make sure you have enough life insurance that the debts are paid, and then they have something to live off of, or invest, or whatever they can do to try to live off that for a while. But the bride of Christ has no debts to pay. Jesus Christ didn't leave us with debts to pay. He didn't come to earth and then rack up a whole bunch of things and then, all right, see you later, I'm gone, you pay it. And once again, the debt we have is to love one another and to love God with all of our hearts and just serve Him. So dealing with debt, continuing on, is getting behind knocks over a domino that sets off a chain reaction that leads to desperation. Desperate people do desperate things. Some of the most desperate things that have been done by people have been related to money, finances. And desperate people do desperate things. But it starts with that first domino. It starts with the beginning of that chain reaction. And so the goal is to encourage people to encourage others to not set off that first domino to get that negative chain reaction starting that then leads people to a desperate situation. On the other hand, paying off debt begins a good downhill snowball that leads to financial freedom. And let me tell you, there is a liberating feeling not being in debt. It's a liberating feeling. My wife and I have had times of being in debt and not being in debt. And let me tell you, the times of not being in debt is much more preferable to times of being in debt. I can just say that right now. There is just a liberating feeling. You don't have that hanging over your head. And one of the downfalls of debt, one of the problems with debt, is that debt steals from the future to pay for the present. And really is an interesting concept for me the first time I heard that put this way. But it really does. Because you're paying for something now with borrowed money that you're going to be paying on for a while, so that money that you're using to pay on what you got now could have been used for something else in the future, but you're having to then pay what you got back here. You're stealing from the future to pay for the present. So example here is a $2,000 credit card debt paid in 3 years with 15% interest, costs an extra $496, or about $165 a year. Now what would you do? What could you do with that $165 each year that you're paying on that credit card? Now let's say the $2,000 is for a vacation. You had a great time. You had a great vacation, wonderful time. But then you spend the next 3 years paying for that vacation you took in 2020. I don't know if vacations are allowed this year, but But let's say 2019. Let's say in 2019 you took a vacation, and you traveled and you went somewhere, and then you're paying on it through 2020, and then you're paying on it through 2021, and it takes you all the way up till 2022 to pay it. And 15% interest is an average amount for credit cards. I mean, usually you don't see anything really below 10%. Although, unless it's a promotional rate, you don't really see anything below 10%. But apparently one of my credit cards I have is they're really generous. They're 9 point something, which I couldn't believe they're doing. But then one of the other another credit card is about 15%. And then there's another credit card that has 18%. You're saying, why do you have so many credit cards? Because I don't want to cancel them because that hurts my credit. Okay, I don't need 3 credit cards. I just have them. One I got before I was married, and then another one we got, both my wife and I, and then we got another one when we switched some bank accounts in Michigan. They were offering a promo thing, which was pretty enticing, and so that's how we ended up with 3. So there's the story of how we ended up with 3. Not because we're running up debts on 3 credit cards that we're maxing them out or something. But it's interesting to see the differences in interest rate from 9 point something to about 15 to then I think one is close to 18. And it's generally speaking, a regular credit card interest is 15, 20%. Some are even higher than 20%. But either way, so I just picked 15% here. That's an extra $496 of that $2,000 purchase. Now, just do the math. That $496 that's a quarter of $2,000. That's about 25% of $2,000. So now here's the thing. Now this is the thing. The way the math works out, the total amount you're paying. So if you combine the 2,000 and the 496, it comes out to 496 is about 20% of the total amount. Everything put together. Notice that's more than 15%. 15% is annual percentage rate, but one person put it this way, annual percentage ripoff, because that's not the total percentage of what you're paying. I mean, and I was looking down through on this where I did this calculation. They had some explanation on how the interest is calculated and all. It's like this whole long equation. I mean, it's just that's how you get higher than 15%. But that's $165 a year. Now, what can you do for $165 a year? I was thinking about that. I could pay for most of my wife's cell phone plan for $165. I think probably maybe 2/3. I don't think I could pay for 3/4. Maybe I could pay for 2/3 of my wife's cell phone plan, if I'm doing my math right. Actually, no, I don't know. It might be, I don't know. I didn't do the math. But maybe it is 3/4. I don't know. I don't think that's a good chunk there to pay for my wife's cell phone. We pay about $20 a month for her cell phone. And she doesn't need much data. She's at home most of the time. But that's what else could you do with $165 a year? That could be, for one person, depending on the size of your household. I mean, that's $165. That's a good chunk of groceries. You go to the store, and we could have an overflowing cart at the grocery store we shop at most of the time for $165. What's your electric bill? That could be more than a month of your electric bill for $165, but you're paying somebody else. You're paying just that money in interest that could be used productively. That interest money is not productive. It could be used productively somewhere else. And so you're stealing from the future. Debt is stealing from the future to pay for the present. And that's money that you could be putting to use somewhere else. You could be investing $165. You put that in your brokerage account or your IRA or whatever it is. You could be investing that, and instead of just paying it toward interest. I get an email newsletter. Well, it's mostly financial related, but they talk about politics and how it relates with the financial system and all that. But anyway, it's called The Daily Reckoning. But I looked back at one of my previous emails, and one of the sections of that particular email talked about debt and the whole situation with the Federal Reserve and how our national debt is doing. And they said a titanic burglary of the future. Plunging into debt introduces a sort of hand-to-mouth living. It diverts cash flow to the service of existing debt, often unproductive debt. And so investment in the future never makes it past the present. It is a titanic burglary of the future, a grand heist. Explains Daily Reckoning contributor Charles Hugh Smith, debt has one primary dynamic. Borrowing money to consume something in the present brings forward consumption and income. If we choose to consume now, we have less income to save for future consumption or investments. If we sacrifice consumption today, we have more money in the future for consumption or investing. Those who brought their consumption forward can no longer add to present consumption as their future income is already spoken for. So then, how is our economy able to grow? Well, we've got to keep adding more debt to the economy. If people are already maxed out as far as what they're able to do with their debts, well, just keep on pumping that easy money machine and keep on, and it just keeps on building that up. Now, this was in the context of how the national debt, does the national debt help promote economic growth? And their point is, or their theory is, I guess you could say, or I guess maybe statistics, is that when the United States had lower debt levels and then the U.S. took on more debt, that did have a bigger impact in the economy of growth. But once you hit a certain point, each dollar of debt has less of an impact on the economy because the economy is already so awash in debt. 50 years ago, they continue here, 50 years ago, $1 of debt may have yielded an additional dollar of economic growth, real or otherwise, perhaps even more. That is, of course, because the national debt burden was vastly lighter. Each dollar borrowed since 2008 has yielded under $1 of growth. It is perhaps 40 cents by some estimates we have encountered. It is a dismal calculus. And so, in other words, they just keep thinking, well, let's keep trying the same things. Let's add more debt. Let's add more debt. That'll get growth going. That'll get economic growth going. But what we need, and this was some of the probably maybe more tied in with last week than this week, but what is needed are times of the house being cleaned of bad debt, economically speaking, on a national level. It's actually a healthy thing when if there's bad debts, unproductive debts that are taken and people then, or companies can no longer pay them, they should not be bailed out. The system needs to be able to cleanse itself, but for decades now, the system has not been able to cleanse itself, and so it just keeps on piling up. And then when those bad debts are rewarded and bailed out, it takes away from using that money for more productive purposes. But either way, from a national level and from a personal level, debt is stealing from the future, and that's why the U.S. is probably, when you have politicians brag, or maybe a president brags about, oh, our economy grew at such and such a rate, I say, I don't get too excited when I hear about how blistering hot the economy is growing, because if it is, which right now it's not, is that, it is compared to March, but when things tanked, so they can look at percentages and say, oh, we're shooting up now. Well, we're still lower than we were last year as far as economic production. But they'll say, oh, our economy's growing and our economy's doing so great. But a lot of that is based on created money, on debt, and not really solid, substantial growth. And it's on a lot of unproductive things. If there are any kinds of best kind of debts, what would those be? Well, one of the things that, if there's any kind of debt that could be justified in our society today, would be a mortgage. I will say, however, don't look at mortgage as an investment. A mortgage is not an investment. A mortgage is still a money-losing endeavor. Why? Because if you don't pay that mortgage off early, or if you finance most of that house, you're paying over the course of that 30 years a whole lot of interest. You're basically paying for the house at least twice, depending on what the interest rates are. And now interest rates are extremely low right now, basically at record lows. So that's at least better. But you know, a person could stay in an apartment, which is nothing wrong with that. But either way, I'm paying for housing, or you're paying for housing one way or another. And then once you get to the point, if you own your house, or if you've had a mortgage, you own your house, you get that paid off, well, then you don't have to pay rent anymore. So that is one of the benefits of owning a home, buying a home, having a mortgage. But we still, once again, we need to go back to our attitude toward debt. It should not be one of, I'll just get a mortgage for that. No, we should be positioning ourselves to do whatever we can to minimize the need for a mortgage. Now, once again, in today's hyperinflated assets, the asset bubbles, it's harder to, you'd be saving for a long time, depending on what your income is, before you could own, buy a house outright, unless you get an investment property where it's, $50,000 and you fix it up or something, which it's a good idea if a person's in a position to do that. So anyway, you have mortgage debt. And then there are people with medical debts, and that should also, any of these debts should be avoided as much as we can. There's sometimes people fall in hard times and they have medical debts. Once again, no matter what debt it is, it should be paid. It should be paid. Now, in today's area of insurance, in Massachusetts, most everybody is insured, so hopefully medical debts aren't too high among people in Massachusetts. But there are some people who have taken on some very substantial medical debts. Eliana, do you have a question? A mortgage. Oh, a mortgage is a death grip. What were you going to say? That's what the word means. No, a mortgage is a loan you take out to buy a house. But it does mean death grip. It relates to mortality. A loan, when you borrow money, in most cases from a bank or credit union. And so you go, and there's a lot of paperwork involved with mortgages. So for a lot of people, they can be a headache. But there was one big bank that got in trouble a few years ago. Well, they got in trouble for a couple things in the last several years. And one of the things they were doing was not being completely forthcoming with information for mortgages. Like, they were really trying to skirt the regulations regarding who qualifies for a mortgage. And they got in trouble for that. And then they got in trouble also for opening new accounts for people. It sounded like it was millions of accounts, new bank accounts for people that they didn't have authorization to open, but they were doing it to try to meet their sales goals and all that. I'm getting off topic, but it was the same bank. So hopefully they're cleaning up their ways now. But anyway, so yes, a mortgage is a home loan. It's a home loan. You can either have a fixed rate mortgage, or there are also adjustable rate mortgages. But usually you're paying on a mortgage. You can get either a 15-year is one that some people do, and then 30-year is the most common. They might even have 20-year. There might be some odd ones in there, but usually it's a 30-year, or some people that are really ambitious do a 15-year. Which if you're not sure you can pay for a 15-year because it's more expensive, what you do is you get the 30-year and you make the same payments you would make with a 15-year and get it paid off sooner. But you knock it out of the park. But anyway, so that's what the mortgage is. Medical debts, and it's tough to have medical debts. It really is. Talk about an unproductive. Well, I guess it's productive if it kept you alive. Okay, it's a productive debt. But it's too bad. But there are people who fall in those hard times and have medical debts. There are also auto loans, and so we should not look at debts as that. Oh yes, I want to have this debt. That it's just a good thing to have really any kind of debt. But we recognize that there are some differences as to the purpose of the debt and the value of the debt as far as what you're accomplishing with the debt. And auto loans are one that I would definitely put auto loans below the mortgage. The mortgage I'd put at the top. Auto loans are below. And And by the way, mortgages, don't get a mortgage assuming that your house is always going to appreciate in value either. Some people, they get a more, I'll just buy this house and certainly it's going to just appreciate in value. And by the way, when the time comes, or if the time comes, Lord willing, that our family were to get in a position where we could buy a house, we would not be buying a house. Basically, we'd be buying a house for a place to live. Not as an investment, not as thinking, it's going to just shoot up in value, which, over the year, housing has had a good run. And especially in this region, housing stays more stable than other parts of the country. And part of that has to do, there's various factors, but there's also higher education debt, which at times can be put to use. But once again, that's not an investment. Going into debt for college is not an investment. It might, for some people, it might end up being a necessity if that's just what they're bound to do, they're going to do, and they're going to go for a particular vocation. But once again, this comes back to just having the heart, having the attitude and mentality of a saver. That not so many times people just, all right, it's time to go to college. Boom, let's just look for the student loan. Or time to get a car. Many people don't think about saving. Some people do, and there are a number of people who are responsible in that way, and they do think about saving. But there are times we live in such a society now where people do want the nicest, the best things, that they could actually go without the debt if they just would decrease their standard for what they're willing to do. They say, oh no, that's the destruction of the middle class, reduced standard of living. Well, for you and I, for Christians, we're going to have a really high standard of living in heaven. So if I end up just to stay out of debt, need to reduce my standard of living a little bit, it's worth it for life on this earth till I get to heaven, and the standard of living will be through the roof. And but often people today in this society are not content with having a lower standard of living. They just want to always raise their standard of living. And if someone can afford an expensive automobile, then more power to them. I'm not making, each of you are in your own situation with your income and your family life, your own situation. So that's why I want to give you basic principles and information, but not necessarily you have to take things that are being presented and then apply them of what is best for your situation. But higher education, the assumption is, well, I'm just going to go out and get a loan. Well, if college costs $5,000 a year or $10,000 a year, you can say, well, that'd be more understandable. You take out the student loan. It wouldn't be that hard to get those things paid off. But what about people that are going to college that's 15, 20, and more thousands a year, and they end up with $100,000 in higher education? Just absolutely, there are cheaper ways to get the education you need to succeed in this world. Instead of paying, just astronomical amounts of money. Now, I understand if someone's going to be a doctor or, a surgeon or a lawyer or something, maybe there are just cases where you got to pay more for the education. But part of it is that, higher education costs have gone through the roof as well, and they're always going up. And the state institutions are always wanting more money too, specifically the state one, but even private schools are very, very expensive as well. It costs a lot of money in that regard. But there are cheaper ways to get away with that where you don't have crushing debt loads, and it's huge. I think student debts are over $1 trillion, and I forget what the number was last week, but I said the number last week. And then there's everything else. And everything else, you should avoid like the plague as far as going into debt for. Don't go into debts for your television. Buy the $150 model instead of the $800 model, or even if you want a little bigger one, get the $200 model instead of the $1,000 model. But TVs come pretty cheap today that are pretty useful for most everybody, without going into debt for it. And there's all kinds of other things. So that would include credit card debt and those things. We should do our best to avoid those things. Like once, and I understand there are times when people fall on harder times. 2019 was a pretty difficult financial year for our family, but that was why I ended up advancing in pursuing a part-time job that was going to give a more stable income, because, well, we just didn't want to stay on that trajectory where we were going, and the Lord has blessed and has helped in that area. But that's going to bring us to this next part here of 3 options. So how do we get our financial house in order if your financial house isn't in order? There are 3 options. Let's say you have debts and you're trying to take care of that. Well, first of all, you need to increase income. Increase income. And that was what I did last year. Increased income, and that helped. Definitely helped. Decrease spending. Decrease spending. You could do that as well. Or most of the time, it's a combination of both. We need to have some increased income, but we also need to really keep an eye on our spending, because even if you increase this income, sometimes with increased income comes a temptation to just keep that spending going higher. And oftentimes a combination of both is the most helpful. And next week we're going to get into more of some of that area of spending and the areas that are common for where we spend money, and for where I believe a lot of people are overspending in certain areas. And so hopefully that'll be the focus next week. So some help, some basic principles for decreasing debt. And this is going to be, I've tried to keep this basic and simple throughout this series, practical. This is going to be the most profound point of all, the entire series for decreasing debt. Can anybody guess what it is? No new debt. There you go. If you're trying to get out of debt, don't take on any more new debt. And that's where the increase in your income comes, is that let's say you just don't have enough money coming in to pay the bills. And oftentimes many of our expenses are fixed, where you got housing expense, you've got utilities, and those things you can't really do a whole lot about. Maybe you have vehicle expense, whatever it might be. So a lot of the debts, if I were to make just make a list of all the bills that we have, the vast majority of our money is going toward fixed, for the most part, just fixed expenses. And when it's wintertime, guaranteed the natural gas bill is going up to a certain amount. And part of it depends on what the price of natural gas is as to how much the pain is. But this year so far is a little higher than last year as far as the cost of the gas. But either way, I just know, okay, summertime is a little respite. Wintertime, here's the shooting up for a few months of the bill. Those are fixed. I mean, that's just what it is. Or they do budget billing so you can pay the whole thing. But either way, it's the same amounts you're spending every year. There's not going to be much of a change in that, unless you want to keep it, 60 degrees in your house all the time, which I don't recommend. It's probably not good for your health, and who knows. Just keep it warm enough that it's not hard on your body. No new debt. That's the first profound point. The next one is pay all minimums first. In other words, don't not pay one bill in order to put extra to another bill. And once again, that should be common sense, but for some people they might not know that. Maybe for the children here, you can take some of these principles and tuck them away and be introduced to them now so you can use them later. But pay all minimums first, that should be basic. But let me just tell you, working in the financial industry, you'd just be amazed at what people do and don't do regarding finances. So you just be amazed. We've had requests before of someone asking if we would be willing to co-sign on their loan they're taking out with us, that they're applying for with us. I mean, hey, can't fault them for asking, but no, that can't be done. Sorry. What's that? They have all the money, yeah. Yeah. So you just, there's all kinds of things that people do regarding money. And so I try to not take anything for granted, especially in this day where when people are growing up in school and they don't know how to tell time on the hand, read the hands of a clock. That's real. A lot of the basic things that people growing up in school are not able to be taught. And by the way, I heard that years ago, from about 8 or 10 years ago, from a mother of public school students who came right out and said, like, a lot of them don't even know how to read the hands on a clock. That's what she said. So I'm not just making that up. Someone else said that. And cursive. So there's a lot of things that just, and finances is one of those things where there's a lot of conventional wisdom that people are they're left to themselves and get caught up in this system in society. So pay all minimums first. That's the basic thing. Whatever the minimum is you owe, if you don't have a dime to put extra, just make sure your minimum is paid. But that's not going to really cut it, though. It shouldn't cut it. You need more than that. You need to pay extra. Pay extra on smallest or highest interest debts first. And the reason I say smallest or highest interest debts first is that it could depend on each individual and the debts that they have. If you have debts with similar interest rates or balances, then you pay off the revolving credit first. Pay the credit cards off first. Not your car loan, pay the credit cards off first. And other lines of credit. Avoid payday loans or things that are alternatives to payday loans like the plague. I was looking up one, I guess they don't call themselves a payday lender, they are a payday alternative lender. They are an installment lender, but it's a lot of the same things like a payday lender. $500, if you were to borrow $500 from them, and these are people who go to these are desperate for money, and they will loan to just about anybody. $500, if you want to spread it out, if you want to make payments of $97 a month, that would be 21 payments of $97 a month, which would cost you $2,037 for a $500 debt. Or if you cut it down to 6 payments of $146, you'd be paying $876, which would still be $376 worth of interest. So that's ton of interest there. If you were to pay, so pay $60 on $2,000 with 15% interest. That would be 3 years and 8 months with total interest of $603.32. Or if you increase that to $80 on $2,000 with 15% interest, say a credit card, that would cut it down over a year to 2 years and 7 months with total interest of $412.99. So what you want to do is you want to get that snowball rolling. Get whatever debt you can paid off first, put extra all on one, just focus on one at a time of extra, just knocking it out, and then you get that one knocked out, and then you go on to the next one, and then you can take that money you were paying toward that debt and just keep on shoveling it on, and then it just keeps on going. And then eventually you say, wow, I'm feeling pretty good about this situation. It's getting better and better.
Just take one credit card and pay off the other one so you get them out of the way. No, you don't do that.
And I know you don't do that. I don't think so. All right, and then a couple more here, and then we'll be done. Evaluate every expense. And we'll get into more of this next week with different expenses in life. But evaluate all your expenses and say, where am I overpaying? And then sacrifice luxuries. If you're in debt, there are certain things we should be willing to say, sacrifice, I'm going to do without for now so I can put more on my debts, try to get out of debt, and then go to, then I'll have more for later. Then there'll be time to enjoy some of those other things that maybe I couldn't enjoy while I was trying to pay these things down. But that's the whole thing about no new debt, is don't get yourself back into that. We need to keep on moving.
To live debt-free.
Oh, yeah.
Over 20 years, I never owed anybody a dime. Then I got the bright idea, I wanted to buy a house and have a cabin.
Yeah.
So then I decided, well, I went to the bank. They said, you don't have any credit.
Yeah.
Zero credit. You don't have any bad. You don't have any good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just as bad as, I mean, it's not bad. It's okay. Mm-hmm. But as far as looking at getting a mortgage on a place, it just doesn't work so well. So I had to go out and get a small
Mm-hmm.
prepaid credit card
Yeah.
for $1,000, and then I kind of used that for
Yeah.
a while, and then I canceled it, and I got all kinds of offers. And so I got one or two of them, and I bought a car, and then this and that,
Yeah.
and things, that I almost wish at this point, although I'm keeping up with all of them and everything, I did make one mistake. They're canceling out. about 3
Well,
credit
next
cards.
next week we will talk about credit, whether you have debts or not. Talk about credit and credit
But
history
it
and
really
all that.
didn't-
But
it really didn't bother me,
anyway,
so, but the thing
so-
is sometimes people do that and they think they're doing something it's a good idea. But I have since seen and talked to people that were loan officers, and when it comes to mortgages on houses, sometimes even if you have you've never had any credit before, if you've got the income and you've got a good down payment, they're still willing to do a mortgage, and I didn't have to go through all that. Like I thought.
yeah, for a mortgage especially,
Especially
your income and your debt to income ratio really does have a greater sway than consumer loans, particularly credit cards. They consider a lot of your credit score, your credit history, like that. But and income and debt to income is important then too. But especially for a mortgage, even if you have a great credit score, the income part is huge. So anyway, that is the end of for tonight, and we'll get into some more other practical things that hopefully be helpful next week. Does anybody have any questions for tonight? Eliana? What is a what?
You said something about auto debt.
Auto.
That's like
Oh, auto loans. Auto loans. That's when people buy money to buy a car or a truck or something. What?
he meant borrow.
Did I say buy money? Borrow money. That's when people borrow money to buy a car.
And it's funny
Yeah.
how in some parts of the country, you see different things that trend. In the Midwest, there's a lot of payday loan shops. I mean, they're on every corner.
Oh, yeah.
Everywhere you go, there's somebody
Yeah.
who's willing to, give you whatever, and they'll hold your.
Well,
cards.
that I will say that particular company that I quoted with the payday alternative they're not even allowed to operate in Massachusetts. People in Massachusetts can't get loans to them, and several other states as well. So every state has their different laws. Anyway, let's go to the Lord in prayer, and we'll be. Oh, Josiah?
What's a payday?
A payday loan, that is it's meant to be a short-term loan that you just need like $300 or $500 to get you through. It's people who are desperate and have nothing left, and they get a loan, but it has exorbitantly high interest. This one I quoted to you, their maximum interest goes up to 490%. And so it's not meant to be paid on over a long time. It's basically you get money, and then when you get paid, let's say you get into a pinch and then you get paid, then you just pay that money back. But the problem is it's a bad cycle, because you take that money that you've earned and then you're paying your debts off with it, and then what money do you have left? You got to go back and get more. So it's a bad cycle to be in. All right, anybody else? Eliana?
What does
Evaluate.
evaluate mean?
To think about, to look at and consider and be able to judge between, okay, am I spending too much, or am I spending what's just right on this particular thing? Is it good or bad? All right. Anybody else? Caleb? You have any questions? Shay, do you have any questions? Okay. All right. We'll pick up next week. All right. Let's go to Lord in prayer.